Hi all, Joshua Steger here from ETFadviser.com.au, and today I'll do my usual weekly rundown of the Aussie ETF market and what we should be looking at for the week ahead. So as per usual, the weekly subscription email has gone out to subscribers, and I just want to touch base on some of those key areas that we've been watching the last few weeks. So here's a review of our key ideas, and you can see we've been very interested in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng market, so that's started to move now. But also China's starting to creep up. So when you look at the rolling 12-month performance figures, you can see that the Chinese market has been up there with one of the top performers, but hasn't done much for the last kind of 9 months. So really interested to see that starting to move out. So there's a few ways to play it. And then we've been interested in kind of energy metals, and there's a couple ways to play that as well. And also watching some of the key resources as well. So there you've got copper miners, and then MVR is the broader kind of mineral resources space, and MVR in particular doesn't have a huge exposure to BHP and Rio like some of the other resources ETFs. So something to keep in mind as to how to play that best. But let's just have a look at how some of our recommendations have performed. So we've still got China kind of setting up, we've still got copper stocks setting up, but most of the others we've got kind of recent highs, so it's been quite a good week for us again. So and I think we've got some really good ideas going forward as well. So it certainly appears to be a bit of a step change in resources, and we've been talking about that the last few weeks. If you want to keep in touch with the recommendations but aren't ready to sign up for a full subscription yet, I am offering a free 30-day trial, so you can just go into the show notes in YouTube and click that link. It'll take you to a Google form, and more than happy to offer a 30-day free trial and see if this service is of benefit to you. So let's get started back into the charts. And the biggest one that I wanted to focus on to start with this week was Ethereum. So crypto's been a really interesting space. We've had that Bitcoin finally, we had been talking about that for a long time, just because of that sheer strength that it showed out of that tariff correction, then held that really nice base, and then broke out. When was that? Mid-July, and since then it's kind of held pretty flat here. So Friday was a bit of a worry, a bit of a sell-off on high volume, but it's kind of recovered the last 2 days. So I'll certainly be watching Bitcoin in the week ahead. But what's really got my focus at the moment is Ethereum. So Ethereum was kind of the poor cousin there of in crypto out of Bitcoin and Ethereum. It was the poor cousin, but at the moment, you can see when Bitcoin started to move, Ethereum moved as well, and that's been a really significant move, just in terms of there's kind of 50%. In a couple of weeks. So it's pretty exceptional, and obviously there's some big things happening in that space. And what has piqued my interest is that it's had that run, but then it's only pulled back some, under 10% in the last few days, and is showing clearly there's not a lot of sellers at these levels now. So that's really interesting, and that's a key idea I'll be watching. This is actually, I'll let the cat out of the bag, but this is actually our key idea for the week. So we'll see how that plays out. It's kind of come up on that weekly chart against that resistance where you'd expect, these kind of previous highs. But if it starts to move out of here, I mean, anything's possible, and some real momentum could come into the name, even more so than what's been shown here. So certainly that's one thing to watch this week. And once again, Bitcoin as well, that's also looking quite constructive. Despite that selling, I'll be very interested to see if it can start to move out of that $120,000 mark, and certainly it's already very close to all-time highs. If it gets into all-time highs again and gets some momentum behind it along with Ethereum running, I mean, I think that's a really good space to keep an eye on, because there's momentum building. Let's also just touch on some of those precious metals. So gold, not doing a whole lot, and just given, we've spoken about this the last couple of weeks, given that run, it needs a rest, and probably something to watch for later in the year. It looked, there was a bit of strength there, but then had 3 selling days back to back, so not doing a whole lot. Silver as well, it's probably struggling a little bit. It was a slower mover than gold, and while it has kind of moved out because gold hasn't corrected, it's probably struggling a little bit here as well. So that's not really a key focus at the moment. On to copper, and we've been talking about this the last few weeks. So obviously there's your US tariff announcement. There's a nice kind of little flag, and then we're waiting for some news, and that news appeared in terms of China building another hydroelectric dam, and quite a significant one at that. So that's where it's kind of pushed copper this week. And that's why I've been quite surprised that the copper stocks actually haven't moved much at all. So here's one way to play it in Australia. So this is copper wire. These are global copper miners. And you can see that's actually setting up a really kind of constructive base here now as well. So if that starts to push out of there, in conjunction with that copper price where it is, and you see on the weekly as well, it's right where the resistance would be, a little bit V there, and that's where it's kind of had to settle in with a bit of right side, and then it could really start to move, and then you'd be looking at $16 for another bit of resistance to come in. So that's a pretty significant move potentially, and then from there, just given the backdrop from what we've already seen with some of these, as said, with that rare earth steel in the US, and we're starting to see a scramble for supply, and particularly with the amount of materials that we required for all the data centers, electrification, all that kind of thing that's going to happen over the next few years. So resources look very cheap within the scheme of things, so that's something to keep in mind. Let's have a quick look at the Aussie market, and you can see we're kind of now in that rotational zone. So it did pop up, but now you kind of got selling in the banks and you got buying in resources. So the index isn't doing a whole lot, but underlying we've definitely got a bit of a shift underway, and that's kind of what we expected. At these kind of previous highs, that would kind of struggle a little bit, and it doesn't. It kind of looks a little like the Euro 50 at the moment. So these are the top 50 stocks in Europe. And you can see there's your tariff correction, really fast bounce out, but then just hasn't been able to get through into new all-time highs. There's no catalyst, so it's just kind of chopping around. There is a bit of action underlying in that market, but as a broader index, there's not a whole lot happening. So let's just go back to the Aussie market, and you can kind of see that rotation. So here we've got OZF. This is a financials index. You can see there's your distribution, and then it's kind of just been selling since then. And I think at the moment, it's about, from the highs, it's off about, say, 7.5%, which is pretty significant. But I think the banks had run very hard, and we were, just watching those resources getting cheaper and cheaper. And now finally we've got some rotation. So here's, this is the one, the ETF that I like to watch for the resources space, just because it doesn't have such a huge exposure to BHP and Rio. It certainly has BHP and Rio in the portfolio, but not significant, not like a 40% position or something like that, like some of the other ETFs. So this looks really constructive now as well. You can see on the weekly chart it's coming up against some resistance, and that's been a good 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks up, and then obviously had a bit of selling this week. So but yeah, it's starting to look really quite constructive, and that right side, it's just tightening up. So that's something to watch, and resources really haven't done a lot for a long time. So you can kind of see, even going back to 2023, it's just kind of been in a downtrend, and this is the first time, if we were to draw a trend line, that we're starting to see a bit of action just putting its head above that kind of trend line just this week. So really interesting, and I think there's certainly a step change underway at the moment, and worth watching, and really important for the Aussie market because we've got such a big exposure there, but also for ETF investors how to play that, and there's so many different options. So here you've got BHP, and as you can see, we've been talking about that downtrend line, and once again this week, where it just popped its head above that. So we'll see it's back above all those moving averages, those key 50-day, 20-day, 10-day, it's just sitting on the 6-day now. So a strong few weeks up. It's good to get a bit of selling, and then we'll just see how that plays out and where the buyers come back in. And Rio, much the same, where it'd been incredibly weak, and now it's been incredibly strong back up there. So now you've got that really V-shaped recovery. Obviously, it's going to find a bit of selling there, and we'll just see where the buyers come in obviously we've got earnings as well, so that's going to be a bit of a needle mover this week, so something to keep a close eye on. Here we've got the S&P 500, so this is in the US, just creeping up. We've got new highs. I mean, it looks all very good. Plenty of buying there, green bars, very little selling at the moment. So the bulls are certainly still in charge of these key markets in the US. So you've got here also, you've got the NASDAQ, new all-time highs this week as well. So not a lot wrong with that, but we are aware that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when that you'll get some kind of correction. And even if you got a correction down to, say, back to the 50-day moving average, on the index that's not that significant. It might be 5 to 10%, 5 to 15%, but on individual stocks there can be really big moves, and some of those sectors, if they're extended, could get quite a significant pullback. So you've just got to be a little bit careful at the moment buying anything that's too extended. Here we've got the small caps in the US, so that's that chopped around this week, but certainly improving. It's up against that weekly kind of resistance. There you've got another kind of V-shaped move, so a little bit more time here where it can make the next move is certainly constructive. So we'll see how that plays out. What's been weak this week is India, so that's been one of our key ideas for a while, but it's kind of come up against this. That weekly resistance has been too much for it. And there's where you get that V-shaped recovery, and therefore you have to put a bit more time into the right side before, the buyers all come back in. And just time is kind of what's needed, because I think this market's still going to be a key growth engine for the world in terms of their economy growing and what's happening over there. So a little bit weak, just under those moving averages. You kind of see that selling this week. So it just hasn't been a market of a lot of interest at the moment. And so here you've got the Nifty 500. Kind of want to see buying come in soon. Don't want that to go a whole lot lower from here. So we're interested to see how that holds this week and where the buyers come in. But what can happen, and what we're looking in India, is for the same thing to kind of happen that's happened in Japan. So there you've got the trade deal with the US, and the market's popped up nicely. I think that was, it was 5% on the day. So that's a pretty significant move. And you see here on the weekly, it's kind of just through that resistance into these previous highs. So really interesting, see how this plays out. But that's what I'm expecting to happen for the Indian market, where we don't have a trade deal at the moment. So it could happen at any stage, but that's probably going to be the mover that's going to get the Indian market back and in momentum stages again. Here we've got the China 50 index. So this has been really interesting. So here you've had on the weekly chart, that's where you had the stimulus kind of announced to kind of rectify what's happening in the Chinese economy. And then we've sat in this huge base for, as I said, it's kind of like 9 months where it's done nothing, and actually had a big shakeout here as well with the tariff correction. But since then, just look how much this is really tightening up. You can kind of see from here onwards, there's a lot more green bars than there are red. So there's certainly buying emerging, and it's popped up just midweek and then sold off to close the week. But it's right at that point where it certainly looks contracted enough that it could start really pushing. And we don't know what the catalyst will be, but the chart's certainly telling us tail at the moment that it's looking ready to move. So if we had a quick look at some of those key ideas, C new, you can see is already kind of leading that a little bit. It's already moving into that high. It's just above those highs, whereas the A50 is just a little bit lower at the moment. But that's going to be a key idea this week, key thing to watch. Looks like it's ready to go. And then obviously we've also got the Hang Seng already moving, so that's a positive sign that China can start to move as well. So this has been one of our key ideas, and there's been a few ways to play that in the ETFs in Australia. But I mean, just look at this base. We've been talking about it for so long that it's finally, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days up, 1 day selling. It's got buying there already, but just look at pretty much from here, or even from here, just look at that green. There you've got green skyscrapers, skyscraper. So a really solid week there. And we're starting to get Tencent and Baba starting to move as well. So Baba had been weak. We talked about that. We kind of saw this trend line. We wanted it to kind of move above that, and it certainly has moved above that. It's just popped up slightly, a bit of selling, but I think we actually have them reporting mid-August, so something to keep an eye on. But there is a lot of news to come for these big cap stocks in China, particularly in terms of their AI and what they're doing with AI over there. So Tencent's actually leading the way. I'll just adjust this chart so it looks a bit better. But Tencent's actually moving into those previous highs now and actually had a really good week. And that was on some AI related news as well. So there's big things still to happen, I think, in China, and with these Chinese stocks. They're not so far behind in AI as we've seen with DeepSeek, and there's a lot more to come. So that's Tencent, really good move up against those previous highs. See how it plays out here. And then you've got kind of mid-August, you've got their report as well. So really key space to watch. Once these big cap stocks run, the China market runs, and the Hang Seng starts to move into what that's now kind of 2.5 year highs. Momentum's certainly underway, and I think most investors are still very much underweight China and Hong Kong and Asian stocks. This is another proxy that we like to watch, but we can't access in Australia. But this is the Chinese small cap ETF, and that's just crept up this week. Big volume buying. Certainly, big step change there as well. It's probably a little bit extended, and that's what I'm thinking that's going to happen in China, that we're going to get a bit of rotation out of these small caps and then back into the big caps, which are kind of lagged. So it's a bit different to what we're seeing globally, where the big caps have been the big performers and the small caps the big caps have been the big performers globally in the major markets like the US and Australia, but the small caps haven't done much. But in China and Asia, it's been the opposite. So we'll see if we do get some selling in these small caps, and then we start to get some buying in, say, Baba, Tencent. It's going to be really interesting in the couple of weeks ahead. So that's something to watch. In terms of time, I've probably already rabbited on for quite a lot. Let's just touch base on some of these resource ideas as well. So you've had a really couple strong weeks for XMET, which was a key idea. So this is the energy materials, and you can kind of see, what we were watching was this base here, and then it's just had that's a really momentum induced move, and that's something to keep an eye on. I kind of now expect, just given that run, that we might have a little bit of a pullback, which will give us a secondary buy point. But that was all-time highs there for XMET, the ETF, and then that just crept higher. So want to see a bit of a pullback buy as a potential secondary entry. And there's a few others, ACDC as well, now that it seems lithium's starting to run now as well. So this has some lithium exposure, and you can see that because this has been listed longer, it's not at new all-time highs there on the weekly, but it's just come through this kind of resistance here and approaching the resistance up here on the weekly. So that's really constructive. Boom, then it just moves out really nicely. So there are a couple of things that we're watching, some real step changes in the market. So it's not all about resources. It's not all about financials and big cap stocks in Australia. We're starting to see a bit of action move into those resources. So that's going to be really interesting. Key things to watch. But as I said, Rio, BHP look a little extended. But this week we want to see where that buying comes in, and that's potentially a point to enter as well. So there's going to be a big week ahead. We've got crypto, we've got our eye on, we've got resources and some key ways to play that for subscribers, and then obviously Asia and China. So it's going to be really exciting. And once again, I'm still very cautious on some of these extended names. That's why I'm more opting to look at where the money's starting to run and things that haven't had such a huge run so far. So I'm just a little bit cautious on the big cap indexes, the major indexes, Nasdaq, S&P, even the Aussie market. But underlying in that, I think there's some really good opportunities. So hopefully that gives you a bit of colour in terms of what you can watch this week. And once again, if you're interested, I'd certainly welcome you to sign up to a 30-day free trial so you can kind of see what we're talking about in the ETF space, where we see some good opportunities. And as I said, yeah, really exciting time for Aussie ETF investors.